October 1st, 1946. The world's first international military tribunal sentences 12 key Nazi officials to death after finding them guilty of committing war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity. The condemned include Hermann Goering, second in charge in the Hitler regime, creator of the concentration camps and founder of the Gestapo. Hans Frank, Governor General of occupied Poland and tormentor of Krakow. Julius Streicher, the virulent anti-Semite who founded the notorious Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer. On October 16th, 1946, at 1 a.m., the condemned men mount the gallows erected in the Nuremberg prison.
Guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity. Death by hanging.
Hermann Goering escaped the hangman by swallowing a cyanide capsule in his cell. The bodies were incinerated and then thrown into a river. It is not widely known, but the mental health of the Nazi officials tried in Nuremberg was monitored by psychologist Gustav Gilbert and a team of psychiatrists. One of them, 34-year-old Army American psychiatrist Leon Goldensohn, spoke with them nearly every day from January to July 1946. He filled a dozen notebooks with accounts of the interviews scribbled in his physician's scrawl. His notebooks were kept secret until 2004. The day he was demobilized in July 1946, Leon Goldensohn filed away his notebooks and typed up summaries. He went back to his normal life, continuing to work as a physician in New York. The book he hoped to write never got off the drawing board. Goldensohn died prematurely in 1961 at age 50. His wife Irene discovered the documents as she was going through his files, but didn't do anything with them. The notebooks were scattered. It would be another 40 years before they were brought back together. They are among the tiny handful of documents that take us inside the cells of the key Nazi war criminals during their trial. The voices that ring out of Leon Goldensohn's notebooks shed stark new light on the Nazis' mindsets, actions, and underlying motives. Why did they do it? Did Julius Streicher, Hans Frank, and Hermann Goering experience some kind of trauma or illness during their childhood that turned them into monsters? Could they possibly have been so warped by racism and anti-Semitism that they lost every trace of humanity? As a U.S. Army major, then lieutenant colonel, Leon Goldensohn helped liberate France and then occupy Germany. He arrived in Nuremberg on January 3rd, 1946. The curious yet anxious young psychiatrist is supposed to interview the fallen Nazi leaders whose decline is mirrored by their belongings piled up in the hallway. What kind of men are they? What makes them tick? Leon Goldensohn, armed with the psychiatric know-how of his time, will try to answer these questions.
the psychiatrist, is determining whether Goering, Frank, Streicher, and the others are any different from us, individually or collectively. It's also extremely important to find the answer, if indeed there is one, to our biggest question. Were these men any different psychologically from their fellow Germans?
I think in a practical sense it was a good idea to have a psychiatrist and a psychologist. The decision to conduct the interviews, interrogations, has left a lot of very rich historical material. In that sense, it does bring us into a world which we have, a mental world that we have difficulty in comprehending, and through these notebooks and similar material, we get closer, at times, closer to those individuals than we can do through their bureaucratic records and so on, and their orders, etc., that they left at the time.
Leon Goldensohn's own personality remains a mystery. We know he was a Jew, a fact mentioned just once in his notes. We will probably never know if his Jewishness played a role in his duties at Nuremberg. We do know that Goldensohn was first and foremost an American physician. His ability to remain neutral as he listened to the Nazi leaders was instrumental in getting them to open up and talk freely, which is what makes Leon Goldensohn's experience so remarkable. The mission the U.S. government entrusted to Leon Goldensohn seems nearly impossible to us today. On a purely medical level, he is responsible for monitoring the physical and mental health of the prisoners, but he is also given the task, and great challenge, of rooting out the psychological origins of Nazi crimes. At the time, it was widely believed that these atrocities had been committed by a pack of psychopathic monsters. Was that true? And if so, could it be verified? Four figures stand out in Leon Goldensohn's notebooks because of the intensity of their words. Hermann Goering, Hans Frank, Rudolf Höss, the commandant at Auschwitz who was brought to testify at Nuremberg, and Julius Streicher. February 12, 1946. Hans Frank is one of the first prisoners Leon Goldensohn visits. Hans Frank is 45 years old at the time of the trial. From 1939 to 1944, he was Governor General of occupied Poland. He lived in Wawelkastel in Krakow. He claims to know nothing about what was going on 60 miles away in Auschwitz. This hardline Nazi was the founder of the National Socialist Lawyers League, Hitler's attorney, and Bavarian Minister of Justice. He introduced forced labor in Poland, then created a quarantine area for Jews in Warsaw. He eventually decided to starve the ghetto before liquidating it in May 1943. Hans Frank is clearly happy to have a visitor. He's been depressed since a failed suicide attempt. Leon Goldensohn is accompanied by a German translator. In interviews that sometimes run for more than an hour, he uncovers all he can about the defendants' personal lives. He asks questions about their sex life, family life, and childhood. Everything a psychiatrist wants to know about his patient.
Da Sie Psychiater sind, finden Sie meinen Fall sicher sehr interessant.
Do you have any physical problems?
Nein, außer einem kleinen Stechen in den Fingern. Ich habe mir die Pulsadern aufgeschnitten. Ich wollte mich umbringen, weil ich alles für Hitler geopfert habe. Und dieser Mann hat uns im Stich gelassen.
How did you first meet Hitler?
Mein Vater war Jurist aus einer alteingesessenen rheinländischen Familie. Meine Eltern haben sich nie gut verstanden. Sie haben sich getrennt, als ich 10 Jahre alt war. Ich bin dann bei meinem Vater geblieben. Ich habe Jura studiert und bin Anwalt geworden. Da war ich 23 Jahre alt.
And that's when you met Hitler?
Ja, das war im selben Jahr, als ich meine Frau Brigitte kennenlernte. Sie war Sekretärin. Wir haben sofort geheiratet. 1926 wurde mein erstes Kind geboren und ich musste einen Broterwerb als Jurist finden. Das ist einer der Gründe, warum ich Hitlers Angebot angenommen habe, sein Anwalt zu werden. Ich will die Schuld dafür nicht meiner Frau geben, aber das war eine wirtschaftliche Notwendigkeit.
So is Frank a real schizophrenic, or is he faking it? He's a schizophrenic when he says, "There are two Franks in me. One is here and the other is the Nazi leader." I wonder myself how the Nazi could commit these crimes. The first looks at the second and says, "What a nasty louse you are, Frank." I think he's a coward and one hell of a faker. What about your personal life?
Meine Heirat war ein Misserfolg, obwohl wir 5 Kinder haben. Meine Frau interessierte sich für nichts, wofür ich mich interessiere. Die Musik berührt sie nicht. Sie ist praktisch veranlagt. Ich bin Idealist. Viele Jahre lang hatten wir keine Beziehung zwischen Ehemann und Ehefrau. Also hatte ich Liebhaberinnen. Die letzte war eine Jugendfreundin, die ich wieder getroffen hatte. Sie war eine erbitterte Gegnerin Hitlers und des Nationalsozialismus. Politisch haben wir uns überhaupt nicht verstanden. Heute glaube ich, wenn ich sie geheiratet hätte, wäre ich kein Nazi geworden. Ich bin so klein und leicht beeinflussbar. 1942 wollte ich mich scheiden lassen. Meine Frau hat sofort an Hitler geschrieben. Eine Woche nachdem ich den Scheidungsantrag eingereicht hatte, hat Hitler sich gegen diese Scheidung gestellt. Das zeigt Ihnen, welchen Einfluss Hitler in Deutschland hatte.
By the time of the trials, Hans Frank was in a very disturbed mental condition. And his stance was in some ways contradictory, but basically it amounted to saying that he took his full share of responsibility for what went on, but at the same time that he wasn't individually responsible for anything. It was a stance that a number of the Nazi leaders on trial at Nuremberg tried to adopt. Hans Frank tried all the time to put the blame squarely upon Hitler, and I think in that Hans Frank was sincere. I think he did go through this terrible mental phase of turmoil whereby he saw retrospectively that awful things had been not done in the name of Hitler, in the name of Germany, and that he had played a big part in this.
Every day since November 1945, the criminals have walked to the courtroom through this hallway, which still exists. It links the prison to the courthouse by elevator. Defendants going to the courtroom look like men on their way to the office. Most carry a file detailing the charges against them. They were given a copy at the start of the trial so they could study it.
Yes, Major Wallace.
Attention! Tribunal!
When Goldensohn first visits the court in early January 1946, the trial is still in its first stage. The prosecution presents its case against the Nazi leaders. One of the first hearings he attends focuses on Hans Frank.
In order to make it
Baldwin, the American prosecutor, reads off the charges and evidence against the Governor General of Poland. The case is easy to prove, especially since Frank gave the Americans 38 volumes of his personal diary when he was arrested, in which he recounts everything.
I refer to a statement made to the political leaders of the NSDAP on 14 December 1942 at Krakow. It is contained in the Frank Diary. In the German text, the extract appears in the 1942 diary volume, Part 4, at page 1331. Dr. Frank is speaking. I will endeavor to get out of the reservoir of this territory everything that is yet to be got out of it. Defendant Frank was not only responsible for reducing the general government to starvation level, but was proud of the contribution he thereby made to the Reich.
At a January 1943 conference, Defendant Frank states, "Once we've won the war, it won't matter to me whether the Poles, the Ukrainians, and everybody else living in this country is starved or made into mincemeat. It is of no importance whatsoever." In another report dated August 12, 1942, he adds, "The fact that we're sentencing 1 million or 2 Jews to death matters little to me."
You didn't know anything about what was happening in Auschwitz?
Wissen Sie, über den Nationalsozialismus und die Verbrechen habe ich das meiste während dieses Prozesses erfahren. In Deutschland haben wir keine Berichte über die Judenverfolgung gehört. Es gab keine freien Zeitungen oder freies Radio.
Weren't a good many Jews killed in Poland while you were there?
Nein. In Auschwitz ja, in Oberschlesien. Aber ich kann Ihnen beweisen, dass sich das völlig meiner Kenntnis entzog. Ich habe niemals einen einzigen Juden in ein Konzentrationslager interniert. Ich habe niemals einen einzigen verbrannt. Das kann ich beweisen.
So you don't feel at all guilty?
Doch, für eine Sache fühle ich mich schuldig. Ich habe das Gefühl, wie ein Irrer hinter Hitler hergelaufen zu sein, ohne Grund. Ich habe an diesen Mann geglaubt. Man kann Hitlers hypnotischen Einfluss nicht unterbewerten. Wenn ich gewusst hätte, was ich während des Prozesses erfahren habe, hätte ich anders als 1942 protestiert.
You protested?
Ja, ich habe eine berühmte Rede gegen die Konzentrationslager und gegen die SS gehalten. In Wien, München, Heidelberg. Das hat ganz schön Protest hervorgerufen. Man hat mich aus meinen Parteifunktionen entlassen. Aber sie haben meinem Antrag auf Versetzung nicht stattgegeben. Ich bin in Krakau geblieben, im Palast des alten Königs. Aber ein König ohne Macht.
Besonders bei ihm hervorzuheben ist in seiner Laufbahn während der nationalsozialistischen Diktatur, dass er 1942 in Konflikt mit Himmler geraten ist. Und zwar deswegen, weil er die Vernichtungs- und Ausbeutungspolitik mäßigen wollte. Die Frage, die sich natürlich stellt, ist es das Motiv, was er in seinen Gesprächen mit dem Psychiater sagt, oder gibt es ein anderes Motiv? Und nach Einschätzung der Historiker geht es ihm nicht unbedingt oder überhaupt nicht in erster Linie um eine Mäßigung der brutalen Politik gegenüber den besetzten Teilen Polens, sondern es geht ihm darum, dass er glaubt, die maximale Ausbeutung, ökonomische Ausbeutung mit dieser Terrorpolitik nicht erreichen zu können.
The prisoners are isolated in their cells. Leon Goldensohn is one of the only people with whom they ever talk, aside from their attorneys. They are watched by a guard day and night. The lights are always on. They have to sleep on their backs, so they can always be seen. This began after one of the defendants killed himself at the start of the trial. Their life follows a strict routine. Every morning, a barber comes in to shave them. Then they have to clean their own cells. The grills are opened, and a guard hands each man a broom. Göring refuses to lower himself to this humiliating task. He'd rather live in a dirty, disheveled cell. To help him get to know the prisoners better, Leon Goldensohn has biographical notes, a copy of the charges against them, and the results of intelligence quotient tests, the famous IQ test administered to the Nazis. It turns out that all of them, yes, all, except Streicher, have above-average IQs. Goering even asked to retake the test. He couldn't bear coming in third on the Nazi intelligence chart. Leon Goldensohn will make 10 visits to the cell of the main Nuremberg defendant, Hermann Goering, Hitler's henchman, the man they call the Predator. Goering never loses his self-control and oozes arrogant self-assurance. Hermann Goering is 53 years old in 1946. The son of a top Prussian official and friend of Bismarck, a World War I hero, a former fighter pilot with 22 air victories. Like many Germans, he found defeat hard to stomach. 1922 is a decisive year for Goering. He marries a wealthy Swedish countess and meets Hitler, whom he immediately sees as a man who can avenge the German people. With ties to the aristocracy and banking community, he plays a key role in the legal conquest of power. When he's arrested by the Americans, he lists his titles at a press conference as follows: Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, Air Force Minister, Prime Minister of Prussia, President of the Reichstag, Forestry Commissioner, Master of the Reich's Royal Hounds, the state's second in charge, the Führer's designated successor. He forgets to mention that he invented the Gestapo as well as the concentration camps.
Ich bin sicher, dass ich in die Geschichtsschreibung eingehe als ein Mann, der viel für das deutsche Volk getan hat. Dieser Prozess ist kein politischer Prozess, kein Strafprozess. Von allen Anklagepunkten, die gegen mich erhoben werden, haben mich die angeblich von mir begangenen Plünderungen von Kunstgegenständen am meisten gepeinigt. Dabei geschah das nicht in der Absicht zu plündern. Wenn ich sie nicht mitgenommen hätte, wären sie den Russen in die Hände gefallen. Ich bin ein Mensch mit Kultur. Deshalb ertrage ich dieses Gefängnis nicht, wo ich wie ein Kleinkrimineller oder Dieb behandelt werde.
Das heißt also, er ist wirklich lange Zeit bis 1940 der zweitmächtigste Mann. Er hat einen persönlichen Lebensstil, der zum Teil ans Groteske erinnert. Also er liebt die Dekoration, er trägt Fantasieuniformen, er ist ein Kunstliebhaber, liebt Theater, Musik, Malerei, ist einer, wenn man so will, der großen Kunsträuber oder derjenige, die gehört zu denjenigen, die sich in extremen Ausmaß beispielsweise Gemälde oder Kunstgegenstände von vertriebenen Juden oder enteigneten deutschen Juden angeeignet hat.
The trial has been going on for nearly 4 months. Leon Goldensohn has been in Nuremberg for 10 weeks now. After the prosecution has rested its case, each defendant is given a chance to present his defense, aided by an attorney. Hermann Goering is the first to take the stand. The dramatic egocentric is all too happy to proudly acknowledge his role in the rise of National Socialism.
Es war selbstverständlich für uns, dass wenn wir
einmal an die Macht kommen würden, wir entschlossen waren, diese Macht unter allen Umständen zu behalten. Wir wollten ja nicht die Regierungsgewalt und die Macht um der Macht willen, sondern wir brauchten die Macht und die Regierungsgewalt, um Deutschland frei und groß zu machen. Habe alles getan, die nationalsozialistische Bewegung zu stärken, zu vergrößern und unablässig daran gearbeitet, sie unter allen Umständen in die Macht, und zwar die alleinige Macht zu bringen.
He was certainly an absolutely confirmed Nazi, but as I've just been saying, his form of Nazism was very much one of power, a power-hungry, as a Machtmensch in the German terms, a power individual. He was someone who later on, unlike Hitler, who was very ideologically centred and had very firm ideological beliefs, Goering was far more pragmatic, far more flexible in these senses. What mattered to him was power and getting things done. So he was an ideal foil for Hitler in this regard, in that he saw his role all the time in making sure that power functioned, that power worked.
All these fellows care about is saving their own skins. When I look at them today, I wonder how these characters ever struck fear into the world. The most surprising thing is that they don't appear to feel any guilt. It's incredible. They crush civilization and all the feelings that make it possible for us to live together. As he left the courtroom, I distinctly heard Goering say to his co-defendants, "This trial is a good thing. As I've always said, the earth is round and it turns. One day our luck will turn as well." That Goering is sure of himself, is often arrogant, has a childish attitude, and is always a cynical show-off.
Goering was an obese morphine addict. With his drug supply cut off, he's worked himself back into good physical shape in prison. He holds tremendous sway over his fellow defendants. He has them living in a state of constant mental terror and domination, as Leon Goldensohn and the prison warden soon realize. They decide to cut back communication between the prisoners. From then on, Hermann Goering eats his meals alone, either in his cell or in a separate dining room. The prisoners are no longer taken out for walks as a group. Each man goes alone, under even heavier guard. The new measures enrage Goering.
Wenn Sie denken, ich sei der Gefährlichste, ist das nicht einfach deshalb, weil ich der oberste Nationalsozialist der Gruppe bin. Man darf nicht aus den Augen verlieren, dass wir es hier mit historischen Persönlichkeiten zu tun haben. Ob wir im Recht oder Unrecht sind, wir sind historische Persönlichkeiten und der Gefängnisdirektor ist ein Niemand.
So, as an historic figure, as you say, are you ready to shoulder your share of the responsibility for what happened?
Ich bin allein verantwortlich für die Amtshandlungen der Regierung. Aber Achtung, nicht für die Vernichtungsprogramme. Ich war Hitlers Nachfolger und als dieser trete ich vor das deutsche Volk.
But of course there too, he was rather clouding over one or two other things, which was his deep involvement in anti-Jewish policy following the pogroms of 1938, but much more than that, in the wake of the responsibilities they got for dealing with the economics of anti-Jewish policy following the pogrom and forcing the Jews out of the economy, placing upon them this 1 billiard Reichsmark fine, so to say, for causing the damage. But that then led him to, a month or two later, in January 1939, to delegate responsibility for emigration, i.e. for expulsion of Jews, to Heydrich and the leadership of the security.
February 19th, 1946. The prosecution is going to show the court a film on Nazi atrocities. The defendants are tense. They know the images will have a stronger impact on the judges than the often fastidious and seemingly endless reading of written documents. The presentation includes German films recovered by the Russians, along with footage shot when the Auschwitz and Majdanek camps were liberated. The world sees the mass murder carried out by the Third Reich. The world sees the crematoriums, the extermination chambers, the Zyklon B gas used to kill on a massive scale. And while the extent of the killing is already clear, the world doesn't yet realize that 95% of the victims were Jewish. The defendants sit there, rigidly, in the dark. They knew about the existence of the camps and what went on there. Yet they can't bear to look at the bodies, the bones, the mass graves. The entire courtroom watches to see how the Nazis will react. Will they finally display some feelings? An exasperated Goering looks away.
Why didn't you watch the film?
Zunächst einmal, im rechtlichen Sinne stellt das keinen Beweis dar. Sie haben sehr gut 100 deutsche Kriegsgefangene töten und ihnen für diese Darstellung der Grausamkeiten russische Uniformen anziehen können. Sie kennen die Russen nicht so wie ich. Viele dieser Aufnahmen wurden während der Revolution gemacht. Die Körper voller Köpfe zum Beispiel. Sie mussten die Leute selbst erschießen, um danach die Fotos der noch frischen Leichen zu machen.
How can Hermann Goering think for 1 second that Leon Goldensohn will champion his cause after he's told the young psychiatrist such despicable things? And yet, he talks on and on. He understands that the interviews in this cell will be his last chance, apart from his courtroom appearances, to justify himself before history and to exonerate himself of the most damaging charges.
Weren't you the one who created the first concentration camps in 1933?
Ich gebe offen und stolz zu, dass ich die ersten Konzentrationslager errichtet habe. Das war eine Maßnahme gegen die Kommunisten und die Feinde des Nationalsozialismus, aber sicher nicht in der Idee, Menschen in Vernichtungslagern zu töten.
But you did agree with the idea that Jews are not desirable as human beings.
Die Frage ist nicht, ob sie erwünscht waren oder nicht. Der Unterschied zwischen Juden und Deutschen war so groß, dass es nicht die geringste Möglichkeit für die Existenz der Juden in Deutschland gab. Dass die Juden aus Deutschland evakuiert werden mussten, war klar. Dass sie ins polnische Generalgouvernement gehen sollten, war auch klar. Aber nicht, dass sie vernichtet werden sollten. Nach dem Krieg sollten die Juden nach Palästina oder anderswohin gebracht werden.
It is horrifying to think that these men, who drew up a plan to send millions of human beings to their deaths, to indiscriminately kill men, women, children, and old people, lived in a country with such a rich culture, the country of Goethe. Many of them even had university degrees.
April 10th, 1946. In a dramatic turn of events, a key witness shows up in Nuremberg. Rudolf Höss, commandant of the Auschwitz extermination camp. He was arrested just 1 month earlier by the British while hiding at a farm in northern Germany. His testimony blows the Nazis' defense wide apart. The written documents and statements are set aside. For the very first time, the mass murders, the genocide, what would come to be called the Holocaust, is described by a man who helped carry it out. There are words that can make one's blood run cold. Höss utters them. In an administrative tone, without hesitating, he describes sorting prisoners upon their arrival at camp, the gas chambers, the rings ripped off bodies, the molten gold sent to the finance ministry. Rudolf Höss's terrifying words leave the courtroom stunned. The bureaucratic barbarity of the Nazis is plain for all to see.
Höss was a person who had been involved in military or paramilitary organizations all his life, and that seems to have subsumed him as an individual, so that as a person what he wanted to do all the time was to receive orders and be responsible for implementing them in an absolutely unthinking, uncritical fashion. And this is what came across in his Nuremberg testimony.
Leon Goldensohn meets 3 times with Rudolf Höss. He can tell Höss is nervous, but also eager to talk. Höss is being kept in total isolation and has retreated into solitude. He wants to tell everything, to explain his actions and justify himself. Unlike Goering, Frank, and Streicher, SS Lieutenant Colonel Rudolf Höss is not a defendant in this trial. He appears as a witness in Nuremberg. He will be tried later before a military tribunal in Poland in 1947. He will be hung at the Auschwitz concentration camp.
Seit 2 Wochen habe ich Frostbeulen und Fußbäder im kalten Wasser lindern die Schmerzen. Als die Engländer mich verhaftet haben, haben sie mich mehrere Tage barfuß in eine Zelle eingesperrt.
What have you been thinking about today?
An nichts Besonderes. Ich habe eine kurze Biografie meiner Jugend geschrieben. Hier, falls es interessiert.
Read it to me, if you don't mind. I'll understand it better.
Ich stamme aus einer wohlhabenden Familie. Meine Eltern haben sich gut verstanden und ihre ganze Liebe den Kindern gewidmet. Ich wäre gern Missionär in Afrika geworden. Letztendlich wurde ich Soldat und habe geheiratet. Ich habe 5 Kinder. Ich war glücklich verheiratet während der 4 Jahre in Auschwitz. Ich hatte keinerlei Eheprobleme aufgrund meiner Arbeit. Meine Frau wusste bis 1942 nichts. Eines Tages hat sie ein Gespräch eines Verwalters mitbekommen und mich daraufhin ausgefragt. Ich habe ihr die Wahrheit gesagt.
How did she react?
Sie fand das grausam und schrecklich. Nachher hat sie oft gesagt, es wäre besser, wenn ich eine andere Stelle bekäme.
Where were you living?
Ich hatte ein Haus gleich vor den Toren des Lagers. Ich habe es einrichten und einen Garten anlegen lassen.
Have you ever had any sexual difficulties?
Nein, niemals. Diese Dinge liefen immer sehr gut für mich. Mit 17 machte ich meine erste Erfahrung mit einer Krankenschwester in Damaskus.
Have you had any sexual desires since May 1945?
Nein, als ich mich versteckt habe, war da ja die harte Arbeit auf dem Bauernhof und auch das Wissen von der Polizei gesucht zu werden.
2 of the farms at Auschwitz were used as gas chambers. How did you use them?
Das lief folgendermaßen ab. Die Transporte kamen nicht täglich. Manchmal kamen an einem Tag 2 oder 3 dieser Züge. In jedem waren 2000 Menschen. Manchmal kamen 3 bis 6 Wochen kein einziger Transport.
How long were these people held at Auschwitz?
Sie blieben nicht da. Ein Nebengleis führte nach Bechenau zum Ausladen. Sie mussten sich entkleiden. Wir hatten große Schilder mit der Aufschrift Desinfektion oder Bäder, damit es beim Vernichtungsprozess keinerlei technische Schwierigkeiten gab.
Didn't it bother you to kill children as young as your own children?
Das war nicht leicht für mich und für die anderen Militärs. Es war keine Freude, diese Leichenberge zu sehen und diesen ständigen Brandgeruch zu riechen. Aber Himmler hatte das befohlen und sogar die Notwendigkeit erklärt. Alles in allem habe ich mich niemals gefragt, ob das schlecht war.
Leon Goldensohn writes a report on Höss for the prison warden, Colonel Andrus.
Note to Colonel Andrews. Rudolf Höss has no morals or ethical principles. National Socialism prompted this sadist to commit unprecedented atrocities, while outwardly maintaining his social and political respectability. He has the conscience, or what we call the superego in psychiatric terms, of a psychopath. No suicidal tendencies. Does the fact that you put 2,5 million people to death not bother you a little at times?
Ich glaubte, das Richtige zu tun. Ich habe Befehle ausgeführt. Ich weiß nicht, was Sie mit Bestürztsein meinen, denn ich habe persönlich niemanden umgebracht. Ich war lediglich der Leiter des Vernichtungsprogramms in Auschwitz.
Do you ever think about the executions or the fact that people were gassed and their bodies were burned?
Nein, ich habe keine solchen Gedanken.
Do you ever have nightmares?
Nein, nie. Wissen Sie, ich habe die Zeitungsberichte über den Prozess gelesen und bin zu dem Schluss gekommen, dass die Notwendigkeit der Judenvernichtung nicht so war, wie man es mir gesagt hatte. Nun bin ich schuldig, wie all die anderen, und muss die Konsequenzen tragen.
What do you think your punishment should be?
Gehängt zu werden.
Das ist für die Psychologie interessant, weil es zeigt, dass es neben denjenigen, die den Mord tagtäglich begangen haben, eine Gruppe von Organisatoren und Verwaltern gab, die keinen einzigen Mord persönlich begangen haben, aber für Hunderttausende und millionenfache Morde die organisatorischen Voraussetzungen, sodass das Ganze als ein technischer Vorgang erscheint. Das ist das, was uns so zusätzlich so erschreckt und frappiert. Dass ein Mensch auch zu diesem Zeitpunkt, wo er für diese Verbrechen angeklagt wird, mit geradezu bürokratischer Präzision die Vorgänge schildert, ohne irgendeine moralische Dimension dabei zu beachten.
Goering, the former Reichsmarschall, has been suffering from migraine and sciatic pain for several days. According to Leon Goldensohn and Gustav Gilbert, the prison psychologist who also visits the defendants, his symptoms are caused by a desire to avoid upcoming court hearings that will be damning to his case. Goering realizes that Rudolf Höss's testimony made a deep impression on the court.
What do you think about Rudolf Höss admitting to the court that he exterminated men, women and children of all ages?
Das wurde geheim gehalten. Ich wusste davon nichts. Ich kann das kaum glauben. Die Zahlen sind so beträchtlich. Ich verstehe das nicht. Ich kann nicht glauben, dass Hitler davon wusste. Leute wie Höss und Himmler und untergeordnete SS-Leute, die diese Befehle ausführten, mussten Bescheid wissen. Wie konnten sie nur so etwas tun? Das übersteigt meine Vorstellungskraft. Ich bin zutiefst gegen Grausamkeiten und unzivilisierte Aktionen. 1934 habe ich sogar ein Gesetz gegen Tierversuche verabschiedet. Sehen Sie? Ich finde, Frauen und Kinder zu töten ist kein Benehmen eines Gentlemans. Ich respektiere die Frauen und ich finde es nicht schick, Kinder zu töten. Was mich vor allem an der Judenvernichtung quält, ist die politisch ungünstige Reaktion, die ein solches Programm unweigerlich mit sich bringt. Sicher, als zweiter Mann im Staat habe ich Gerüchten über Massenmorden an Juden gehört. Aber ich konnte nichts tun und ich war mit anderen Dingen beschäftigt. Ich war nie ein Antisemit.
It was simply the technical issue of the camps themselves and the actual killing that went on in the camps that he said he knew nothing about those. And you can accept that comment with some skepticism, but on the other hand, it may well be the case that he never bothered to ask, and he wasn't told, and he wasn't aware in precise detail of what was going on. That he knew that Jews were being slaughtered in their tens of thousands, that can be taken for granted. So that was an element at covering up the responsibility which he nonetheless bore in very heavy measure for what was going on with the so-called final solution with the Holocaust.
What did Leon Goldensohn hope to get out of the defendants? Did he want them to feel remorse? To admit to their crimes? Perhaps he simply wanted them to finally acknowledge their involvement in the criminal Nazi system. The trial is now entering its 7th month. The key Nazi leaders have finished presenting their defense. It didn't sway the court one bit. The prosecution's case is as strong and sound as ever. The more lucid defendants know that their fate has been sealed. This is when the court gets its first real taste of madness.
Julius Streicher, will you repeat this oath after me? I swear by God.
Ich schwöre bei Gott,
The Almighty and Omniscient,
und Allwissenden,
that I will speak the pure truth
dass ich die reine Wahrheit sagen,
and will withhold and add nothing.
nichts verschweigen und nichts hinzusetzen werde.
To everyone's surprise, Julius Streicher, the founder and editor-in-chief of the newspaper Der Stürmer, continues to proudly proclaim his anti-Semitism.
You really ought to answer the questions that are put to you.
The case against him includes a string of anti-Jewish quotes, each one more abominable than the last.
Das kann nicht.
He's written countless times that there is only one way to be rid once and for all of the Jews, this damn race: extermination. He arrogantly admits to the court that the pre-war anti-Jewish demonstrations did not erupt spontaneously, but were in fact well-organized pogroms.
War für die anderen Angeklagten viel zu fanatisch. Und da er natürlich vollkommen unbelehrbar war und seine Hasstiraden auch in Nürnberg noch fortsetzte, war es für die anderen natürlich ein Problem, weil sie sich ja der Verantwortung für den mörderischen Antisemitismus entziehen wollten. Und das war auch für die anderen natürlich zu weitgehend, zu engstirnig, zu radikal und natürlich auch taktisch nicht sehr geschickt in ihren Augen.
Leon Goldensohn visits Streicher over and over. He has a hard time completing his interviews with the defendant, who is barely able to carry on a logical conversation. Streicher is 61 at the time of the trial. The former teacher was a German officer during World War I and led the far right in Franconia. He created Germany's most rabidly anti-Semite newspaper, Der Stürmer, and ran it for 22 years. Appointed Gauleiter of Franconia, he fell into disgrace on the eve of the war, but continued to run his paper. He has a favorite hobby, collecting pornographic pictures. With no pornographic magazines to read, Julius Streicher delves into the charges against him. He picks them apart all day long. No matter what Leon Goldensohn tells him, the debauched old man keeps coming back to the only thing in life that truly interests him: Jews.
Ich weiß mehr über die Juden als die Juden über sich selbst. Ich studiere sie seit 20 Jahren.
Is that so?
Ich habe den Antisemitismus eines Abends vor einigen Jahren entdeckt und habe am Morgen verstanden, dass es mein Lebenswerk ist, auf diesem Gebiet eine Autorität zu werden. Ich bin ein eminenter Gelehrter und Spezialist der jüdischen Schriften, besonders des Talmuds.
Lass nicht auf die Reinheit deiner Rasse hält.
Ich habe nichts gegen die Juden, solange sie sich nicht mit unserem reinen arischen Blut vermischen. Das Ziel meiner Zeitung Der Stürmer war, die Deutschen vor dem jüdischen Einfluss zu warnen, der unsere noble Kultur zu ruinieren drohte. Die Vernichtung von 4 oder 5 Millionen Juden hat diese zu Märtyrern gemacht. Deswegen ist der Antisemitismus in einigen Ländern, wo er bereits gute Fortschritte gemacht hatte, weit zurückgeworfen worden. Wissen Sie, jetzt wo Deutschland besiegt ist, regiert der jüdische Bolschewismus in Russland. Die Juden stehen hinter Stalin und in Nordamerika haben wir eine jüdische Demokratie. Übrigens ist die Mehrzahl der englischen, russischen und amerikanischen Ankläger hier jüdisch.
Do you think that Jackson, the American judge, is Jewish?
Sie meinen Jakobson. Es reicht, ihn zu betrachten. Im Laufe der letzten Monate habe ich ihn laufen sehen. Ich habe sein Gesicht beobachtet. Das ist ein Jakobson. Wahrscheinlich deutsch-jüdischer Abstammung.
Well, was he mad? They did psychological tests on him and psychiatric tests and came to the conclusion that he was not mad. That is to say, he was fit to stand trial. He was not clinically insane. However, they also agreed that he was a very imbalanced individual, and that he was obsessional, highly obsessional about the Jews, in the sense that he created this into a type of paranoia. So the question about whether that's mentally ill or not is one you'd have to leave to the doctors, but the doctors said he was not insane. However, he did have this massive pathological hatred of Jews, which seemed to him to explain everything.
Julius Streicher seems to me to be a man of limited intelligence, quite ignorant. In fact, he has a lower IQ than all the other defendants. I see him as an aging psychopath with unresolved sexual conflicts that have expressed themselves for the past 20 years as maniacal anti-Semitism. He fidgets a lot during our sessions. He moves about his hands compulsively. Streicher derives great pleasure from showing me that he's physically stronger than his fellow defendants, especially Goering. But that didn't stop him from having a bout of tachycardia that kept him in bed for 3 days. You look well today. Has your heart stopped bothering you?
Es geht. Heute hatte ich das dringende Bedürfnis, ein Bad zu nehmen. Bin Wasser holen gegangen und habe mich in dieser Wanne von Kopf bis Fuß gewaschen. Ich habe mich mit diesem Tuch abgetrocknet. Ich glaube, es tut mir gut, das regelmäßig zu machen. Ich habe das auch bei mir zu Hause gemacht. Mitten in der Nacht bekam ich manchmal Lust, ein kaltes Bad zu nehmen. Ich bin ein schwungvoller Mensch. Glauben Sie nicht, dass ich nervös bin wegen dieses Prozesses und dem, was dagegen mich in diesen Papieren steht. Wenn jeder ein so ruhiges Gewissen hätte wie ich, nehme niemand Schlafmittel. Mein Gewissen ist so rein wie das eines Kleinkindes. Ich bin übrigens davon überzeugt, dass niemand von denen, die auf der Anklagebank sitzen, diese Massaker gewollt hat. Ich habe von Auschwitz erst jetzt gehört. Vor dem Prozess habe ich davon nichts gewusst. Es ist vollkommen verständlich und normal für mich, Antisemit zu sein. Aber Frauen und Kinder zu vernichten, ist so außerordentlich, dass es schwer zu glauben ist. Keiner der Angeklagten hier wollte das.
What Streicher did know, quite self-evidently, was that Jews were being exterminated, were being killed in their millions, and that he approved of that, and the Stürmer itself put out even more hateful anti-Jewish material during the war at precisely the time that the death mills in the East were going at full tilt. And he welcomed in the headlines the extermination of the Jews.
Leon Goldensohn's interviews with Julius Streicher, Rudolf Höss, Hans Frank, and Hermann Göring are some of the most revealing work the psychiatrist did at Nuremberg. But they are only a fraction of the conversations Goldensohn had there, which involved 16 other defendants and 13 witnesses. All the words he gathered, day after day, comprise a true psychological treasure trove, as he himself said. But what good did it serve? Instead of monsters and sadists, most of the men Leon Goldensohn met in Nuremberg tried to pass themselves off as zealous but ordinary public servants, snowed under in work. Yesterday they were obsessed by pleasing the Führer, now they were ready to do anything to get off. Goldensohn realized that the Nazi leaders were no ordinary criminals. Despite the enormity of the crimes they'd committed, they didn't utter a single word of true remorse. They didn't have bad consciences. They had no room for human feelings. The interviews conducted in Nuremberg's shadowy cells show that the defendants had completely erased the distinction between good and evil from their minds. These cynical men, whether fanatics or mere cowards, remain Nazis to the bitter end.
Guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
July 26, 1946. The defense has just rested its case. Leon Goldensohn's psychiatric monitoring mission officially comes to an end. He gets ready to return to New York before the announcement of the verdict, set for early October. Leon Goldensohn's work no doubt raises as many questions as it answers, but his notebooks have certainly given us a better understanding of the men who managed to lead an entire people down the road to barbarity.
Guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity.